Chapter 10. Gypsy. On a fair Saturday afternoon in November, Penrod's little old dog, Duke, returned to the ways of his youth and had trouble with a strange cat on the back porch. This indiscretion, so uncharacteristic, was due to the agitation of a surprised moment, for Duke's experience had inclined him to a peaceful pessimism, and he had no ambition for hazardous undertakings of any sort. He was given to musing but not to avoidable action, and he seemed habitually to hope for something that he was pretty sure would not happen. Even in his sleep, this gave him an air of wistfulness. Thus, being asleep in a nook behind the metal refuse can, when the strange cat ventured to ascend the steps of the porch, his appearance was so unwarlike that the cat felt encouraged to extend its field of reconnaissance, for the cook had been careless, and the backbone of a 3-pound whitefish lay at the foot of the refuse can. This cat was, for a cat, needlessly tall, powerful, independent, and masculine. Once, long ago, he had been a roly-poly pepper and salt kitten. He had a home in those days and a name, Gypsy, which he abundantly justified. He was precocious in dissipation. Long before his adolescence, his lack of domesticity was ominous, and he had formed bad companionships. Meanwhile, he grew so rangy and developed such length and power of leg and such traits of character that the father of the little girl who owned him was almost convincing when he declared that the young cat was half Bronco and half Malay pirate, though, in the light of Gypsy's later career, this seems bitterly unfair to even the lowest orders of Broncos and Malay pirates. No, Gypsy was not the pet for a little girl. The rosy hearthstone and sheltered rug were too circumspect for him. Surrounded by the comforts of middle-class respectability and profoundly oppressed, even in his youth, by the Puritan ideals of the household, he sometimes experienced a sense of suffocation. He wanted free air, and he wanted free life. He wanted the lights, and the music. He abandoned the bourgeois irrevocably. He went forth in a May twilight, carrying the evening beefsteak with him, and joined the underworld. His extraordinary size, his daring, and his utter lack of sympathy soon made him the leader, and at the same time the terror, of all the loose-lived cats in a wide neighborhood. He contracted no friendships and had no confidants. He seldom slept in the same place twice in succession, and though he was wanted by the police, he was not found. In appearance, he did not lack distinction of an ominous sort. The slow, rhythmic, perfectly controlled mechanism of his tail as he impressively walked abroad was incomparably sinister. This stately and dangerous walk of his long, vibrant whiskers, his scars, his yellow eye, so ice-cold, so fire-hot, haughty as the eye of Satan, gave him the deadly air of a musketeer duelist. His soul was in that walk and in that eye. It could be read, the soul of a bravo of fortune, living on his wits and his valour, asking no favours and granting no quarter. Intolerant, proud, sullen, yet watchful and constantly planning, purely a militarist, believing in slaughter as in a religion, and confident that art, science, poetry, and the good of the world were happily advanced thereby. Gypsy had become, though technically not a wild cat, undoubtedly the most untamed cat at large in the civilized world. Such, in brief, was the terrifying creature that now elongated its neck and, over the top step of the porch, bent a calculating scrutiny upon the wistful and slumberous Duke. The scrutiny was searching, but not prolonged. Gypsy muttered contemptuously to himself, "Oh, Sheol, I'm not afraid of that," and he approached the fishbone, his padded feet making no noise upon the boards. It was a desirable fishbone, large, with a considerable portion of the fish's tail still attached to it. It was about a foot from Duke's nose, and the little dog's dreams began to be troubled by his olfactory nerve. This faithful sentinel, on guard even while Duke slept, signaled that alarums and excursions by parties unknown were taking place, and suggested that attention might well be paid. Duke opened one drowsy eye. What that eye beheld was monstrous. Here was a strange experience, the horrific vision in the midst of things so accustomed. Sunshine fell sweetly upon porch and backyard. Yonder was the familiar stable, and from its interior came the busy hum of a carpenter's shop, established that morning by Duke's young master in association with Samuel Williams and Herman. Here, close by, were the quiet refuse can and the wonted brooms and mops leaning against the latticed wall at the end of the porch, and there, by the foot of the steps, was the stone slab of the cistern, with the iron cover displaced and lying beside the round opening where the carpenters had left it not half an hour ago, after lowering a stick of wood into the water to season it. All about Duke were these usual and reassuring environs of his daily life, and yet it was his fate to behold, right in the midst of them, and in ghastly juxtaposition to his face, a thing of nightmare and lunacy. Gypsy had seized the fishbone by the middle. Out from one side of his head, and mingling with his whiskers, projected the long, spiked spine of the big fish. Down from the other side of that ferocious head dangled the fish's tail, and from above the remarkable effect thus produced shot the intolerable glare of two yellow eyes. To the gaze of Duke, still blurred by slumber, this monstrosity was all of one piece. The bone seemed a living part of it. What he saw was like those interesting insect faces that the magnifying glass reveals to great Monsieur Fabre. It was impossible for Duke to maintain the philosophic calm of Monsieur Fabre, however. There was no magnifying glass between him and this spined and spiky face. Indeed, Duke was not in a position to think the matter over quietly. If he had been able to do that, he would have said to himself, "We have here an animal of most peculiar and unattractive appearance, though upon examination it seems to be only a cat stealing a fishbone. Nevertheless, as the thief is large beyond all my recollection of cats and has an unpleasant stare, I will leave this spot at once." On the contrary, Duke was so electrified by his horrid awakening that he completely lost his presence of mind. In the very instant of his first eye's opening, the other eye and his mouth behaved similarly, the latter loosing upon the quiet air one shriek of mental agony before the little dog scrambled to his feet and gave further employment to his voice in a frenzy of profanity. At the same time, the subterranean diapason of a demoniac bass viol was heard. It rose to a wail and rose again, till it screamed like a small siren. It was Gypsy's war cry, and at the sound of it, Duke became a frothing maniac. He made a convulsive frontal attack upon the hobgoblin, and the massacre began. Never releasing the fishbone for an instant, Gypsy laid back his ears in a chilling way, beginning to shrink into himself like a concertina, but rising amidships so high that he appeared to be giving an imitation of that peaceful beast, the dromedary. Such was not his purpose, however, for, having attained his greatest possible altitude, he partially sat down and elevated his right arm after the manner of a semaphore. This semaphore arm remained rigid for a second, threatening, then it vibrated with inconceivable rapidity, fainting. But it was the treacherous left that did the work. Seemingly this left gave Duke 3 lightning little pats upon the right ear, but the change in his voice indicated that these were no love taps. He yelled "Help!" and "Bloody murder!" Never had such a shattering uproar, all vocal, broken out upon a peaceful afternoon. Gypsy possessed a vocabulary for cat-swearing, certainly second to none out of Italy, and probably equal to the best there, while Duke remembered and uttered things he had not thought of for years. The hum of the carpenter shop ceased, and Sam Williams appeared in the stable doorway. He stared insanely. "My gorry," he shouted, "Duke's having a fight with the biggest cat you ever saw in your life. Come on." His feet were already in motion toward the battlefield, with Penrod and Herman hurrying in his wake. Onward they sped, and Duke was encouraged by the sight and sound of these reinforcements to increase his own outrageous clamours and to press home his attack. But he was ill-advised. This time, it was the right arm of the semaphore that dipped, and Duke's honest nose was but too conscious of what happened in consequence. A lump of dirt struck the refuse can with violence, and Gypsy beheld the advance of overwhelming forces. They rushed upon him from two directions, cutting off the steps of the porch. Undaunted, the formidable cat raked Duke's nose again, somewhat more lingeringly, and prepared to depart with his fishbone. He had little fear for himself because he was inclined to think that, unhampered, he could whip anything on earth. Still, things seemed to be growing rather warm, and he saw nothing to prevent his leaving. And though he could laugh in the face of so unequal an antagonist as Duke, Gypsy felt that he was never at his best or able to do himself full justice unless he could perform that feline operation inaccurately known as spitting. To his notion, this was an absolute essential to combat, but as all cats of the slightest pretensions to technique perfectly understand, it can neither be well done nor produce the best effects unless the mouth be opened to its utmost capacity so as to expose the beginnings of the alimentary canal, down which, at least that is the intention of the threat, the opposing party will soon be passing. And Gypsy could not open his mouth without relinquishing his fishbone. Therefore, on small accounts, he decided to leave the field to his enemies and to carry the fishbone elsewhere. He took two giant leaps. The first landed him upon the edge of the porch. There, without an instant's pause, he gathered his fur-sheathed muscles, concentrated himself into one big steel spring, and launched himself superbly into space. He made a stirring picture, however brief, as he left the solid porch behind him and sailed upward on an ascending curve into the sunlit air. His head was proudly up. He was the incarnation of menacing power and of self-confidence. It is possible that the whitefish's spinal column and flopping tail had interfered with his vision, and in launching himself he may have mistaken the dark, round opening of the cistern for its dark, round cover. In that case, it was a leap calculated and executed with precision, for as the boys clamoured their pleased astonishment, Gypsy descended accurately into the orifice and passed majestically from public view, with the fishbones still in his mouth and his haughty head still high. There was a grand splash. Chapter 11. Concerning trousers. Duke, hastening to place himself upon the stone slab, raged at his enemy in safety, and presently the indomitable Gypsy could be heard from the darkness below, turning on the bass of his siren, threatening the water that enveloped him, returning Duke's profanity with interest, and cursing the general universe. "You hush!" Penrod stormed, rushing at Duke. "You go away from here, you Duke!" And Duke, after prostrating himself, decided that it would be a relief to obey and to consider his responsibilities in this matter at an end. He withdrew beyond a corner of the house, thinking deeply. "Why'n't you let him bark at the old cat?" Sam Williams inquired, sympathizing with the oppressed. "I guess you'd want to bark if a cat had been treating you the way this one did Duke." "Well, we got to get this cat out of here, haven't we?" Penrod demanded crossly. "What fear?" Herman asked. "Mighty mean cat. If it was me, I let an old cat drowned." "My goodness," Penrod cried. "What you want to let it drown for? Anyways, we got to use this water in our house, haven't we? You don't suppose people like to use water that's got a cat drowned in it, do you? It gets pumped up into the tank in the attic and goes all over the house, and I bet you wouldn't want to see your father and mother using water a cat was drowned in. I guess I don't want my father and moth." "Well, how can we get it out?" Sam asked, cutting short this virtuous oration. "It's swimming around down there," he continued, peering into the cistern, "and kind of roaring. And it must have dropped its fishbone, 'cause it's spittin' just awful. I guess maybe it's mad 'cause it fell in there." "I don't know how it's going to be got out," said Penrod. but I know it's got to be got out, and that's all there is to it. I'm not going to have my father and mother—" "Well, once," said Sam. "Once when a kitten fell down our cistern, Papa took a pair of his trousers, and he held 'em by the end of one leg, and let 'em hang down through the hole till the end of the other leg was in the water, and the kitten went and clawed hold of it, and he pulled it right up, easy as anything. Well, that's the way to do now, 'cause if a kitten could keep hold of a pair of trousers, I guess this old cat could. It's the biggest cat I ever saw. All you got to do is to go and ask your mother for a pair of your father's trousers, and we'll have this old cat out of there in no time." Penrod glanced toward the house perplexedly. "She ain't home, and I'd be afraid to—" "Well, take your own, then," Sam suggested briskly. "You take 'em off in the stable and wait in there, and I and Herman'll get the cat out." Penrod had no enthusiasm for this plan, but he affected to consider it. "Well, I don't know about that," he said, and then, after gazing attentively into the cistern and making some eye measurements of his knickerbockers, he shook his head. "They'd be too short. They wouldn't be near long enough." "Then neither would mine," said Sam promptly. "Herman's would," said Penrod. "No, sir." Herman had recently been promoted to long trousers, and he expressed a strong disinclination to fall in with Penrod's idea. "My mammy sit up late nights sewing on his breeches for me, making 'em outen of a pair of pappies, and they mighty good breeches. Ain't going have no wet cat climbing up 'em." "No, sir." Both boys began to walk toward him argumentatively, while he moved slowly backward, shaking his head and denying them. "I don't care how much you talk," he said. "Mammy gave my old breeches to Vermin, and these here ones only breeches I got now, and I'm go to keep 'em on me, not take 'em off and let old wet cat splosh all over 'em. My mammy, she sewed 'em for me, I reckon, didn't sew 'em for no cat." "Oh, please, come on, Herman," Penrod begged pathetically. "You don't want to see the poor cat drown, do you?" "Mighty mean cat," Herman said. "Bet let it old pussy cat lone whore it is." "Why, it'll only take a minute," Sam urged. "You just wait inside the stable and you'll have 'em back on again before you could say Jack Robinson." "I ain't got no use to say no, Jack Robinson," said Herman, "and I ain't go to hand over my breeches for no cat." "Listen here, Herman," Penrod began pleadingly. "You can watch us every minute through the crack in the stable door, can't you? We ain't going to hurt 'em any, are we? You can see everything we do, can't you? Look at here, Herman. You know that little saw you said you wished it was yours in the carpenter's shop? Well, honest, if you'll just let us take your trousers till we get this poor old cat out the cistern, I'll give you that little saw." Herman was shaken. He yearned for the little saw. "You gimme her to keep?" he asked cautiously. "You gimme her before I hand over my breeches? You'll see." Penrod ran into the stable, came back with the little saw, and placed it in Herman's hand. Herman could resist no longer, and 2 minutes later he stood in the necessary negligee within the shelter of the stable door, and watched through the crack the lowering of the surrendered garment into the cistern. His gaze was anxious, and surely nothing could have been more natural, since the removal had exposed Herman's brown legs, and although the weather was far from inclement, November is never quite the month for people to be out of doors entirely without leg covering. Therefore he marked with impatience that Sam and Penrod, after lowering the trousers part-way to the water, had withdrawn them and fallen into an argument. "Name a gooness," Herman shouted. "I ain't got no time for you all do so much talking. If you go get that cat out, why'n't you get him?" "Wait just a minute," Penrod called, and he came running to the stable, seized upon a large wooden box which the carpenters had fitted with a lid and leather hinges, and returned with it cumbersomely to the cistern. "There," he said. "That'll do to put it in. It won't get out of that, I bet you." "Well, I'd like to know what you want to keep it for," Sam said peevishly, and, with the suggestion of a sneer, he added, "I suppose you think somebody'll pay about $100 reward or something on account of a cat." "I don't either," Penrod protested hotly. "I know what I'm doing, I tell you." "Well, what on earth—" "I'll tell you some day, won't I?" Penrod cried. "I got my reasons for wanting to keep this cat, and I'm going to keep it. You don't have to K.E." "Well, all right," Sam said shortly. "Anyways, it'll be dead if you don't hurry." "It won't either," Penrod returned, kneeling and peering down upon the dark water. "Listen to him. He's growling and spitting away like anything. It takes a mighty fine-blooded cat to be as fierce as that. I bet you most cats would have given up and drowned long ago. The water's awful cold, and I expect he was purty surprised when he lit in it." "Herman's making a fuss again," Sam said. "We better get the old cat out of there if we're going to." "Well, this is the way we'll do," Penrod said authoritatively. "I'll let you hold the trousers, Sam. You lay down and keep hold of one leg, and let the other one hang down till its end is in the water. Then you kind of swish it around till it's somewheres where the cat can get hold of it, and soon as he does, you pull it up, and be mighty careful so's it don't fall off. Then I'll grab it and stick it in the box and slam the lid down." Rather pleased to be assigned to the trousers, Sam accordingly extended himself at full length upon the slab and proceeded to carry out Penrod's instructions. Meanwhile, Penrod, peering from above, inquired anxiously for information concerning this work of rescue. "Can you see it, Sam? Why don't it grab hold? What's it doing now, Sam?" "It's spitting at Herman's trousers," said Sam. "My gracious, but it's a fierce cat. If it's mad all the time like this, you better not ever try to pet it much. Now it's kind of sniffing at the trousers. It acts to me as if it was going to catch hold. Yes, it's stuck one claw in 'em. Ow!" Sam uttered a blood-curdling shriek and jerked convulsively. The next instant, streaming and inconceivably gaunt, the ravening gypsy appeared with a final bound upon Sam's shoulder. It was not in Gypsy's character to be drawn up peaceably. He had ascended the trousers and Sam's arm without assistance and in his own way. Simultaneously, for this was a notable case of everything happening at once, there was a muffled, soggy splash, and the unfortunate Herman, smit with prophecy in his seclusion, uttered a dismal yell. Penrod laid hands upon Gypsy, and after a struggle suggestive of sailors landing a man-eating shark, succeeded in getting him into the box, and sat upon the lid thereof. Sam had leaped to his feet, empty-handed and vociferous. "Ow! Ow! Ouch!" he shouted as he rubbed his suffering arm and shoulder. Then, exasperated by Herman's lamentations, he called angrily, "Oh, what I care for your old britches! I guess if you'd 'a' had a cat climb up you, you'd 'a' dropped 'em 100 times over." However, upon excruciating entreaty, he consented to explore the surface of the water with a clothes prop, but reported that the luckless trousers had disappeared in the depths, Herman having forgotten to remove some fish-in sinkers from his pockets before making the fated loan. Penrod was soothing a lacerated wrist in his mouth. "That's a mighty fine-blooded cat," he remarked. "I expected it got away from pretty near anybody, especially if they didn't know much about cats. Listen at him in the box, Sam. I bet you never heard a cat growl as loud as that in your life. I shouldn't wonder it was part panther or something." Sam began to feel more interest and less resentment. "I tell you what we can do, Penrod," he said. "Let's take it in the stable and make the box into a cage. We can take off the hinges and slide back the lid a little at a time, and nail some of those laths over the front for bars." "That's just exactly what I was going to say," Penrod exclaimed. "I already thought of that, Sam. Yes, sir, we'll make it just like a regular circus cage, and our good old cat can look out from between the bars and growl. It'll come in pretty handy if we ever decide to have another show. Anyways, we'll have her in there good and tight, where we can watch she don't get away. I got a mighty good reason to keep this cat, Sam. You'll see." "Well, why don't you—" Sam was interrupted by a vehement appeal from the stable. "Oh, we're coming," he shouted. "We got to bring our cat in its cage, haven't we?" "Listen, Herman," Penrod called absent-mindedly. Bring us some bricks or something awful heavy to put on the lid of our cage so we can carry it without our good old cat pushing the lid open." Herman explained with vehemence that it would not be right for him to leave the stable upon any errand until just restorations had been made. He spoke inimically of the cat that had been the occasion of his loss, and he earnestly requested that operations with the clothes prop be resumed in the cistern. Sam and Penrod declined, on the ground that this was absolutely proven to be of no avail, and Sam went to look for bricks. These two boys were not unfeeling. They sympathized with Herman, but they regarded the trousers as a loss about which there was no use in making so much outcry. To them, it was part of an episode that ought to be closed. They had done their best, and Sam had not intended to drop the trousers. That was something no one could have helped, and therefore no one was to be blamed. What they were now interested in was the construction of a circus cage for their good old cat. "It's going to be a cage just exactly like circus cages, Herman," Penrod said, as he and Sam set the box down on the stable floor. "You can help us nail the bars and—" "I ain't studying about no bars," Herman interrupted fiercely. "What good you reckon nailin' bars go do me if mammy holler for me? You white boys sutny show me bad day. I try treat people nice, nen they go thou my britches down cistern." "I did not," Sam protested. "That old cat just kicked him out of my hand with its hind feet while its front ones were sticking in my arm. I bet you'd have—" "Blame it on cat," Herman sneered. "That's nice. Just looky here minute. Who'd I lend 'em britches to? Do I lend 'em britches to this here cat? No, sir, you know I didn't. You know well's any man I lend 'em britches to you, and you tuck and thowed 'em down cistern." "Oh, please hush up about your old britches," Penrod said plaintively. "I got to think how we're going to fix our cage up right, and you make so much noise I can't get my mind on it. Anyways, didn't I give you that little saw?" "Lil saw," Herman cried, unmollified. "Yes, and this here lil saw go do me lot of good when I got to go home." "Why, it's only across the alley to your house, Herman," said Sam. "That ain't anything at all to step over there, and you've got your little saw." "All right. You just take off you closes and step cross the alley," said Herman bitterly. "I give you lil saw to carry." Penrod had begun to work upon the cage. "Now listen here, Herman," he said. "If you'll quit talking so much and kind of get settled down or something and help us fix a good cage for our panther, well, when Mama comes home about 5 o'clock, I'll go and tell her there's a poor boy got his britches burned up in a fire and how he's waiting out in the stable for some, and I'll tell her I promised him. Well, she'll give me a pair I wore for summer. Honest she will, and you can put 'em on as quick as anything." "There, Herman," said Sam. "Now you're all right again." "Who all right?" Herman complained. "I like feel something round my legs before no 5 o'clock." "Well, you're sure to get 'em by then," Penrod promised. "It ain't winter yet, Herman. Come on, and help saw these laths for the bars, Herman and Sam, and I'll nail 'em on. It ain't long till 5 o'clock, Herman, and then you'll just feel fine." Herman was not convinced, but he found himself at a disadvantage in the argument. The question at issue seemed a vital one to him, and yet his two opponents evidently considered it of minor importance. Obviously, they felt that the promise for 5 o'clock had settled the whole matter conclusively, but to Herman this did not appear to be the fact. However, he helplessly suffered himself to be cajoled back into carpentry, though he was extremely ill at ease and talked a great deal of his misfortune. He shivered and grumbled, and, by his passionate urgings, compelled Penrod to go into the house so many times to see what time it was by the kitchen clock that both his companions almost lost patience with him. "There," said Penrod, returning from performing this errand for the 4th time. "It's 20 minutes after 3, and I'm not going in to look at that old clock again if I have to die for it. I never heard anybody make such a fuss in my life, and I'm getting tired of it. Must think we want to be all night fixing this cage for our panther. If you ask me to go and see what time it is again, Herman, I'm a-going to take back about asking Mama at 5 o'clock, and then where'll you be? Well, it seemed like mighty long afternoon to me, Herman sighed. I just like to know what time it is getting to be now. Look out, Penrod warned him. You heard what I was just telling you about how I'd take back. No, I mean, Herman said hurriedly. I wasn't asking you. I just saying something kind of to myself like.